I've always loved San Francisco. There's something about this city that feels like it's constantly alive, bustling with possibilities and hidden stories. I'm Maya, a 30-year-old graphic designer, and my life here has been a blend of work, quiet moments, and unexpected turns. I live alone in a chic, modern apartment that I'm proud to call my own. It's not huge, but it's perfect for me. The best part is its location, just a short walk from the design firm where I spend most of my days. My job is my passion. I dive into my work with an intensity that often surprises me. Each project feels like a new adventure, a chance to create something unique and meaningful. On weekends, when I need to escape the buzz of the city, I head to a small park nearby. It's my sanctuary. The park isn't anything extraordinary, just a patch of green amid the concrete, but it's where I find peace. The tall trees and chirping birds offer a kind of quiet that's hard to find elsewhere in the city. It's here that I find solace and inspiration, a place where I can think and recharge. One crisp autumn afternoon, while I was enjoying the usual tranquility of the park, everything changed. I was lost in thought, sketching ideas for a new project, when a sudden commotion jolted me out of my reverie. I looked up to see a man sprawled on the grass, looking a bit disoriented. "Are you all right?" I asked, rushing over to him. The man, who looked to be in his mid-30s, blinked up at me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tripped over my own feet," he said with a sheepish grin. His name was Jake, and as it turned out, he worked in real estate. Jake had a charisma about him that was hard to ignore. His outgoing personality contrasted sharply with my more reserved nature. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other in the park. What started as casual conversations soon blossomed into something more. We went from chatting about the weather to sharing stories over coffee. Our weekends began to revolve around each other, and before long, our time together extended into late-night dinners and even full weekends spent exploring the city. Our relationship progressed quickly. It felt natural and exciting, but also a bit overwhelming. One day, Jake proposed that we move in together. I was caught off guard. The idea of merging my life with someone else's was daunting, but I couldn't deny how much I cared for him. After some thought, I agreed. We found a larger apartment in a new part of the city, one with bright rooms and an airy feel that symbolized a fresh start for us. Moving in together was supposed to be a new beginning, but soon I noticed cracks in our seemingly perfect life. It started subtly. Jake suggested that I should cut back on my work hours to focus more on our home and our relationship. At first, I thought he was joking, but as he continued to press the issue, I realized he was serious. I was taken aback. My work meant everything to me. It wasn't just a job, it was a big part of who I was. The thought of stepping back from my career felt like losing a piece of myself. I tried to balance both, but the tension was palpable. The situation was further complicated by Jake's mother, Mrs. Harrison, who lived nearby. She visited often, and her presence added another layer of stress to our relationship. Mrs. Harrison, a woman in her early 60s, was kind but had strong traditional views about gender roles. Her comments about homemaking and prioritizing family over work made me feel as though my career was being dismissed as insignificant. Jake seemed to align with his mother's views more and more, and the strain began to show. Despite the growing pressure, I tried to stay optimistic. I found myself constantly juggling between fulfilling my work responsibilities and trying to meet the expectations set by Jake and his mother. It was like walking a tightrope, and I felt like I was about to fall off. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I sat in our new apartment feeling overwhelmed. I realized that I was losing sight of myself. My independence, which had always been my strength, was slipping away. It was in this moment of clarity that I decided I needed to do something to preserve my sense of self while navigating this new, challenging phase of my life. And so began a silent act of rebellion. I made a decision to pretend that I had quit my job while continuing to work from home. I set up a separate savings account to stash away money for my freelance projects. It was a way to reclaim a part of my life, a small, private rebellion against the pressure I was feeling. Little did I know, this decision would set the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. I thought moving in with Jake would be a new adventure, a chance to build something meaningful together. But as the weeks turned into months, the excitement of our new apartment began to wear off, revealing underlying issues we hadn't fully addressed. Jake's suggestions about my career continued. He would casually bring up the idea of me reducing my work hours, always framing it as a way to enhance our relationship. "It would be nice if you could be around more," he'd say, his voice filled with genuine concern. "We could use more time together. Maybe even work on making our place feel more like home." At first, I tried to brush it off. I thought maybe it was just a phase. But the more he brought it up, the more I felt like my independence was being chipped away. Balancing my job with the demands of our relationship was becoming increasingly difficult. I loved Jake, but I loved my work too. It was a core part of who I was. Things took a turn for the worse when Jake's mother, Mrs. Harrison, started visiting more frequently. Her visits were always polite, but they carried an underlying tension. Mrs. Harrison had her own ideas about how a woman should prioritize her life, and it seemed her opinions were influencing Jake more than I realized. One day, as I was preparing dinner, Mrs. Harrison stopped by unexpectedly. She looked around the kitchen and made a comment that stung. "It's important to make a home feel warm and inviting. You know, keeping things organized and spending time on it can really make a difference," she said, her tone casual but her words heavy with implication. I smiled tightly, trying to keep my composure. "I agree, Mrs. Harrison. I've been working on making it a comfortable place for us." "Oh, I'm sure you're doing your best," she replied, but there was a note of disapproval in her voice. "Sometimes, though, it's better to focus more on creating a nurturing environment at home rather than being too engrossed in work." The conversation left me feeling frustrated and trapped. Jake and I had never discussed this level of interference from his mother, and it seemed like he was aligning with her traditional views more and more. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. I tried to adapt. I cut back on some work hours and focused more on the house, but it felt like a part of me was shrinking. Despite my efforts, the strain between us grew. Jake would often bring up how my work was keeping me away from our relationship. "You're always busy, Maya. Can't you take a break?" he'd say. The final straw came one evening when we had a particularly heated argument. Jake was frustrated, and his irritation bubbled over. "You don't support me or our future," he yelled. "You're always prioritizing your job over us. This isn't what I envisioned for us." I was devastated. I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions, torn between my love for Jake and my passion for my career. It seemed like nothing I did was ever enough. The pressure was relentless, and I was running out of ways to keep everything balanced. In a desperate bid to retain some control over my life, I decided to take a drastic step. I began to pretend that I had quit my job. Behind closed doors, I continued to work on freelance projects, setting up a separate savings account to stash away the money I earned. It was a secret rebellion, a way to keep a piece of my independence while trying to meet the expectations placed on me. Even though this plan provided me with a small sense of control, it added another layer of stress. Keeping up the pretense was exhausting. I had to be careful about when and how I worked, always making sure not to slip up. The emotional toll was immense, and it was becoming harder to maintain the facade. Jake's growing frustration was becoming more apparent. The tension between us reached a breaking point during one of his drunken outbursts. He accused me of undermining his vision for our future, insisting that I conform to his and his mother's expectations. It was a painful confrontation that left me questioning whether this relationship was worth the cost to my own well-being. I started to realize that no matter how much I tried to please everyone, I was losing myself in the process. The facade of harmony was cracking, and beneath it lay the painful truth that something had to change. I had to make a choice, one that would require me to confront the reality of my situation and decide what I truly wanted for my future. The atmosphere at home was growing more oppressive. Every day, it felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep up the pretense of quitting my job while secretly working from home. The strain was taking its toll on me, and Jake's frustrations were becoming more frequent and intense. One evening, Jake came home late, his mood sour and his words sharp. He had been drinking, and it was clear that he was more than just tipsy. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he staggered into the living room. Why are you still working? He demanded, his voice slurring slightly. I thought you were going to focus on our life together. I tried to stay calm. I'm not working. I've told you, I'm focusing on us. I'm just tidying up some things. Don't lie to me, Maya. His voice rose, and I could see the anger boiling over. You're always working, always busy. What's the point of this if you can't even commit to us? I was taken aback by his accusation. I'm doing everything I can.
But this isn't just about me.
It's about us. I'm trying to balance both, but it's not easy. Jake's face flushed with rage. Balance? It feels like you're always putting your work first. You're not supporting me or our relationship. You've changed, Maya. The words hit me hard. They were a reminder of everything that was wrong, of the constant pressure I felt to give up a part of myself for the sake of our relationship. But it wasn't just Jake's anger. It was his growing alignment with his mother's views that was causing the real conflict. His mother, Mrs. Harrison, had been visiting more often, her comments becoming sharper and more pointed. One day, while Jake was at work, she came by to discuss the progress of our new life together. She looked around the apartment with a critical eye, her disapproval evident. You know, she said, a woman's role is important in a home. It's about creating a warm and welcoming space. I hope you're not letting your work interfere with that. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I'm doing my best to balance everything, Mrs. Harrison. She nodded, but there was a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Well, it's important to make sure that your priorities are in the right place. A home needs a woman's touch. The pressure from Jake and his mother was relentless. It felt like I was being squeezed from all sides, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't meet their expectations without losing myself in the process. I was caught in a cycle of pretending and compromising, and it was beginning to break me down. The final confrontation came one night after a particularly intense argument. Jake was drunk again, his emotions raw and unfiltered. We were in the middle of a heated exchange when he suddenly shouted, "If you can't support me and our future, then what are we even doing here? I can't keep living like this." His words were like a knife to my heart. I felt a deep, crushing sense of realization. I couldn't keep living under this pressure. The constant struggle to maintain a facade, the relentless push to conform to someone else's expectations, it was all too much. In the heat of the moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Maybe you're right, I said, my voice trembling. Maybe this isn't working. I can't keep living like this. Jake's face showed a mixture of anger and disbelief. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I nodded, feeling tears well up. I can't do this anymore. I need to find a way to be true to myself. I'm sorry, but I need to leave. The look on Jake's face was a mix of shock and fury. You're just going to walk away? I'm not walking away from you, I said, my voice firm despite the tears. I'm walking away from a life that's making me lose myself. That night, I packed a few bags with the essentials and made arrangements to stay with a friend. The decision wasn't easy, and it felt like I was tearing a piece of my heart away. But deep down, I knew it was the only way I could reclaim my independence and start rebuilding my life on my own terms. As I walked out of the apartment, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The life I had tried so hard to build was unraveling, but in its place, I was beginning to see a glimmer of hope. I had taken the first step toward finding myself again, even if it meant facing an uncertain future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I settled into a small apartment of my own, a cozy space that felt like a blank canvas for a new beginning. I returned to my graphic design work, and my colleagues welcomed me back with open arms. Their support was a balm to my soul, and it reminded me of why I had chosen this path in the first place. I threw myself back into my career with renewed passion. My work became a source of joy and empowerment. It was a relief to focus solely on projects that mattered to me, without the constant pressure to prioritize someone else's expectations. I started to explore new hobbies, painting, hiking, and even cooking, which had always been on the back burner. It felt exhilarating to rediscover parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my previous relationship. One day, while I was at a coffee shop, I ran into old friends. It was wonderful to reconnect with them and share stories about our lives. They were genuinely happy to see me and were curious about my new beginnings. It felt good to share my journey and receive their encouragement. It was a reminder that I had not only lost myself in the past relationship but also gained a new sense of clarity and purpose. Months later, Jake reached out to me. I was surprised to receive a message from him, especially since I had not heard from him since moving out. He was candid about his struggles, including losing his job and feeling lost without me. He expressed a desire to talk and possibly rekindle our relationship. I was tempted to meet with him, to see if there was any way to find closure or understanding. However, after reflecting on everything I had been through, I realized that my life had taken a new direction. I had found a stronger sense of self-worth and clarity about what I wanted. The idea of going back to a relationship that had caused me so much pain seemed like a step backward. When we finally met, Jake was visibly different. He seemed older, more worn out, and his demeanor was one of regret. He apologized for how he had treated me and admitted that he had made mistakes. But as we talked, I knew deep down that the relationship we had was not something I wanted to revisit. "I've changed a lot," Jake said, his voice filled with remorse. "I realize now how much I took you for granted. I'm sorry for everything." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "I appreciate your apology, Jake, but I've grown a lot since we parted ways. I'm in a different place now, and I need to keep moving forward." He nodded, understanding my decision. "I get it, Maya. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a profound sense of closure. I was finally free from the shadows of my past, ready to embrace the future with confidence. I had reclaimed my independence and learned to value myself in ways I hadn't before. My journey of self-discovery had been challenging, but it had led me to a place of personal fulfillment and happiness. The story of my life had come full circle, and I was ready to write the next chapter with a heart full of hope and a mind clear about what truly mattered to me.
Nestled on the outskirts of a vast city, our house was the scene of a normal Thursday evening. After a tiring day at his auto repair shop, Tom would usually have a beer and relax on the couch, while I, Sandra, would keep my eyes fixed on my laptop to stay up to date on the newest cryptocurrency and stock trends. Our modest two-story house, which we chose because it offered the prospect of a future and a family, now felt more like a battlefield for our increasingly different lifestyles. "So, what was today's market like?" Tom asked in a casual tone, but I could feel the tension behind. "It's now the standard for us, the same ups and downs as usual." Attempting to maintain composure, I responded, "Crypto looks good, though." Tom scoffed and threw down his beer a bit too forcefully. "Crypto once more. You are aware that not everything shiny is valuable." With a sigh, I closed my laptop and prepared myself for the dialogue we'd had 1,000 times over. "Even though you can't fix every automobile that comes into your business, you nevertheless choose to fix it because you think it has value. How come you don't think my work is valuable?" "Because automobiles exist, Sandra. You are able to handle, repair, and sell them. It's just reckless what you're doing, throwing our money to the wind in the hopes that it will come back with more." I felt the anger bubble up. "It's not reckless, Tom. It's calculated. There's a difference between gambling and investing. I wish you'd try to understand that." Tom stood up, pacing now. "Calculated? You call putting our hard-earned money into something as volatile as cryptocurrency calculated?" "Yes, I do, because I don't go in blind. I research, I study trends, I make informed decisions. It's no different from what you do with your shop." "My shop is a sure thing, Sandra. People always need car repairs. But this is just a phase. What happens when it crashes, huh? What then?" "We could lose money in any investment, Tom. The shop could falter. Nothing's guaranteed, but we've seen good returns on my investments. Isn't that worth something?" Tom stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's not just about the money, Sandra. It's about security, about not risking everything on a damn coin flip. Why can't we invest more in the shop, expand it? That's a real, tangible way to grow our money. Put all our eggs in one basket. What if something happens to the shop? Tom, diversification is key. That's investing 101. He shook his head, the gap between our perspectives as vast as ever. Diversification, sure, but into something stable, not this digital fairy dust. I stood up, now feeling the need to defend my choices, my independence. You know, for someone who runs his own business, you're surprisingly close-minded. And you're surprisingly stubborn, he shot back. All I'm saying is we could be using that money to build something lasting, something we can see and touch, not just numbers on a screen. The conversation was going nowhere, as usual. Let's just agree to disagree, okay? I won't criticize how you run your shop, and you don't criticize my investments. Tom sighed, the fight draining from him. Fine. But just remember, Sandra, when all this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you. The tension between Tom and me wasn't the only strain in our lives. His family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Living close to his parents and sister meant frequent interactions, each one a reminder of our different views on family and responsibility. It was a Sunday afternoon when Tom suggested we visit his parents. The idea alone made my stomach knot. It wasn't the parents I minded, it was Sarah, Tom's sister. Her lifestyle and choices were a constant source of bewilderment to me. Come on, Sandra, it's been ages since we've seen them, and Mom's been asking about you and more. You know Dad is fighting cancer, Tom pressed, noticing my hesitation. Yeah, I bet Sarah's missed me too, I muttered, my sarcasm not lost on Tom. Look, I know you two don't see eye to eye, but can't you just, I don't know, try for me? Sighing, I agreed. Fine, but I'm not staying if she starts on one of her shopping spree stories. We arrived to find Sarah already there, flaunting her latest designer bag. The air of superiority she carried like a perfume instantly grated on me. Look at this. Just got it yesterday. Isn't it just fabulous? She gushed, barely acknowledging our presence. It's something, I managed to say, biting my tongue. Tom's mother, oblivious to the tension, ushered us in. Sandra, dear, so glad you could make it. You two should visit more often. The afternoon dragged on, with Sarah dominating the conversation, recounting her latest vacation and shopping exploits. I tried to keep a neutral face, engaging in minimal conversation, but my patience was wearing thin. So, Sandra, still playing with your stocks and bits? Sarah sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. It's called investing, Sarah. You should try it sometime instead of blowing through money on things you don't need. I shot back, my annoyance breaking through. Tom shot me a warning look, but it was too late. Sarah scoffed. Investing? Please, like gambling on the internet is anything to brag about. At least when I spend my money, I have something to show for it. Something to show until it goes out of fashion next season, I retorted, unable to help myself. That's enough, both of you, Tom's father interjected, his tone stern. We're here to enjoy each other's company, not to argue about whatever this is. The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable silence. As we left, Tom couldn't hold back his frustration. Sandra, why do you have to provoke her? Can't you just let it go for one afternoon? Me provoke her. She's the one who started it with her snide remarks. I'm just not going to sit there and take it. Tom, it's just sometimes I wish you'd try a little harder for the sake of peace. Try harder? I'm not the one splurging on luxuries and then flaunting them in everyone's face. Why doesn't anyone tell her to stop acting like a spoiled brat? Because she's family, Sandra. We look out for each other, even if we don't always agree with what they're doing. That's just it, Tom. Looking out for each other is one thing, but enabling bad behavior is another. There's a difference, and it's about time someone pointed it out to her. Tom sighed, the weariness evident in his voice. I know, but what can we do? She's set in her ways, and Mom and Dad aren't going to change how they treat her. It's not just about Sarah, Tom. It's about us too. How are we supposed to plan for our future when there's always going to be this financial black hole in your family? We'll figure it out, Sandra. We always do. The news hit us hard and fast. Tom's dad, Mr. Harrison, had lost his battle with cancer. It felt like one moment we were discussing treatment options, and the next we were plunged into mourning. Amidst the shock and grief, Sarah, Tom's sister, took charge of the funeral arrangements. It wasn't long before she dropped a bombshell on us about the cost. Sitting in our living room, looking like a storm cloud had settled over his head, Tom relayed what Sarah had told him. Sandra, Sarah says the funeral's going to cost $60,000. She's expecting us to chip in half. I nearly choked on my tea. $60,000, Tom. That's insane. Are we funding a funeral or a royal wedding here? Tom's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. Now's not the time, Sandra. This isn't about the money. It's about giving my dad the send-off he deserves. But $60,000, there has to be a mistake. It's too much. Tom's voice rose, and I could see the vein in his forehead starting to pulse. My dad has just died, Sandra, and here you are haggling over pennies. What's wrong with you? I flinched at his harshness. I'm not haggling, Tom. I'm just shocked. We never even spent that kind of money on our own house. Tom stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what? I don't need this. I don't need you telling me what's too much for my own father's funeral. If you can't see past your Dan spreadsheets for once, maybe you should just stay out of it. The hurt from his words cut deep, but I swallowed my retort. This was grief talking, not my Tom. I'm sorry, Tom. I'll transfer the $30,000 to Sarah. This is a lot to process. Tom paced the room, hands buried in his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize over the years. Yeah, well, it's not just about the money, Sandra. It's about doing right by him. And if that means paying whatever it costs, then so be it. When I confirmed the transfer to Sarah, Tom barely acknowledged it, lost in his own world of grief and anger. The distance between us felt like miles, not the few feet of our living room. Walking into the funeral agency, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. The last few days had been a blur of grief and confusion, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to learn. I'm here for Mr. Harrison's funeral, I announced to the woman behind the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up from her computer, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're a day late. Mr. Harrison was cremated yesterday. My heart stopped. What? But how? I was told the funeral was today. She shook her head gently, her eyes full of sympathy. The family requested to move the date forward. I'm very sorry for your loss and the confusion. I stood there, dumbfounded, my mind racing. How could Tom not tell me? Why was I left in the dark about such a significant change? Fuming, I dialed Tom's number, my fingers shaking with anger and disbelief. Tom, why the hell didn't you tell me the funeral was moved? I just showed up like an idiot, only to find out I missed everything. Tom's voice was cold and detached. Because I didn't think you cared, Sandra. All you've done is complain about the costs and question every decision. Why would I think you'd want to be there? Because he was my father-in-law. Because I'm your wife. How could you just exclude me like that? My voice cracked, a mixture of hurt and fury. Well, maybe not for long. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded, my heart sinking. I'm done, Sandra. I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who is so indifferent. You're more concerned with your bitcoins and shares than with this family. I've got the divorce papers ready. His words were like a slap in the face. Divorce? Was he serious? You're kidding, right? Over this? Tom, we can talk about it. We can work things out. No, Sandra, it's too late. The house is going up for sale. We'll split everything and go our separate ways. That's it? I was speechless, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Stunned, I wandered back to the parking lot, where I saw Sarah pulling in, driving a brand new luxury car. The sight of it made my blood boil. "Nice car, Sarah. Where'd you get the money for this?" "Inheritance," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes as she tossed her hair back. "Yeah, something like that. Dad left me a little something." The casual way she mentioned her father, with shopping bags in her hands and not a trace of sadness on her face, was infuriating. "A little something, huh? Looks like morning is treating you pretty well." Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a smirk. "Well, we all grieve in our own ways, don't we? Some of us invest in stocks, and some of us in cars." I clenched my fists. The injustice of it all burned inside me. This was all wrong. Tom and I were falling apart, and here was Sarah benefiting from the chaos. "Enjoy the car, Sarah. Looks like it cost a pretty penny, or should I say a pretty dollar." She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty parking lot. "Oh, Sandra, always so concerned about the money. Don't worry, it's all been taken care of." I watched her walk away, her laughter lingering in the air. The man I loved wanted nothing to do with me, and the family I had tried to be a part of was showing their true colors. The days following the funeral felt like navigating through a thick fog of disbelief and betrayal. The weight of the divorce papers in my bag felt like carrying a boulder, a constant reminder of my crumbling marriage. But the sight of Sarah's new luxury car planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't shake off. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to pay a visit to the funeral home, hoping to uncover some answers. Walking into the funeral home, a mix of suspicion and determination fueled my steps. It felt surreal being here under these circumstances, but I needed answers. The place was quiet, the air filled with a solemnity fitting its purpose. At the reception, I recognized a face from the past. Jackie, a classmate from high school who'd ended up in the most unexpected of places. "Jackie," I exclaimed a bit too loudly for the setting. "I didn't know you worked here." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face before recognition set in. "Sandra, wow, it's been ages. What brings you here? Something I can help with." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "Yeah, actually, it's about my father-in-law's funeral. I heard it was arranged here." Jackie's expression turned professional, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Sure, let me pull up the details. Give me a sec." As she typed away, I fidgeted, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The moment she found the record, her brows furrowed. "Okay, here it is." The service was pretty standard. Cremation was requested, keeping things on the simpler side. The total came to $5,000. My heart sank. $5,000? But that's not what we were told. We paid $60,000, or at least we were led to believe that's what it cost. Jackie paused, her face a mask of concern. "That's a huge difference. It was Sarah who handled the arrangements, right? Everything here was billed at $5,000, no more." The pieces were starting to fit together, a picture I didn't want to see. "Can you print me a copy of that bill? I need proof." "Sure thing," Jackie said, her tone sympathetic. She quickly printed out a duplicate of the check and handed it to me. Holding the paper, it felt like a piece of a puzzle that would unravel a bigger deception. "Thanks, Jackie. I've got to sort this out." Armed with the printout from the funeral home, my next stop was confronting the family, particularly Sarah. The air felt heavy as I drove to my mother-in-law's house, where I knew they'd all be gathered, probably discussing the estate and the aftermath of the funeral. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I hesitated at the door, gathering my courage before stepping inside. The sound of my footsteps seemed to echo through the hallway, announcing my arrival. In the living room, Tom, Sarah, and my mother-in-law were seated, looking like a picture of mourning that was about to be shattered. My mother-in-law, her eyes shadowed with grief, broke the silence first. "Dear, we missed you yesterday at the funeral. We thought you'd be there." Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I was told it was today. I'm so sorry for your loss." My voice was steady despite the churn of emotions inside me. I then turned to Tom. "Can we talk in private?" I hoped to spare his mother any more distress. Tom's response cut through the room. "No secrets here. You're not part of this family anymore." His words stung, but I pushed on, pulling up the check from the funeral home. "Then explain this to me. The funeral cost $5,000, not the $60,000 Sarah claimed. Where did the rest go?" Tom looked genuinely shocked, turning to Sarah with a bewildered, "What's this about?" Sarah squirmed under our gazes. I needed the money," she finally admitted, her voice small. The revelation seemed to hang in the air until Tom's mom, overhearing, added, "Your father saved for his own farewell. I even gave Sarah $10,000 more to cover everything." I did the math out loud, tension rising. $70,000 in total, and only $5,000 spent. "Sarah, where's the rest?" Flustered, Sarah confessed to splurging the money on a new car for herself, her gaze darting away, unable to meet mine. I expected Tom to explode, but instead he almost tenderly told Sarah, "You shouldn't have done that. Be more careful next time." His response floored me. "Careful? She committed fraud, Tom, and you're okay with that." Tom's justification left me reeling. "You wouldn't understand. You've got no family. You don't get what it means to stick together." That was the last straw. In front of them all, I signed the divorce papers with a flourish. "Sarah, you owe me $30,000. Pay up or I'm going to the police." Tom's protests followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. I'd seen enough, heard enough. The betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve. As I walked away, the finality of my actions settled in. There was no going back, only forward from here, away from the lies and the deceit that had marred what I once thought of as family. Packing up my life into boxes felt surreal, like I was an observer in my own story. The "for sale" sign outside the house was a stark reminder of the finality of it all. By afternoon, I was settling into a small apartment that felt more like a fresh start than a downgrade. That evening, as I was sorting through the remnants of my past life, my phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen, a name I no longer felt attached to. I answered, curiosity edging out resentment. "Sandra, you need to back off Sarah." Tom's voice came through, tinged with an uncharacteristic harshness. "Back off?" I laughed, cold and sharp. "Not a chance, Tom. She took from me and I want it back. Your sister is a thief." Tom was silent for a moment. "She's family. You wouldn't understand." "Family?" I scoffed. "That ship has sailed, Tom. As far as I'm concerned, you and your sister are just people I used to know." He tried to argue, but I cut him off. "Save it. Sarah has 2 weeks to return my money, or I'm pressing charges, and you stay out of it. You're nothing to me now." Hanging up, I felt a mix of sadness and liberation. The man I once loved was now just another obstacle in my path to reclaiming my life. 2 weeks later, a knock at my door heralded the return of my $30,000. Sarah stood there, her posture defiant, a smirk playing on her lips. "Here's your money," she spat, thrusting an envelope into my hands. "Happy now, you money-grubbing witch." I took the envelope, my gaze steady. "It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about principle, about not letting you walk all over people." She laughed, hollow and bitter. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." As she turned to leave, I called out, "Just remember, Sarah, karma's a real pain. What goes around comes around." Closing the door, I leaned against it, the envelope heavy in my hand. The money was a small victory, but the real win was standing up for myself, refusing to be a victim of their greed and lies. Life had found a new rhythm, calmer and more predictable. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang, displaying a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Tom, a voice from a past I had neatly folded away. Hey, I need a favor. A big one. Tom's voice sounded more worn than I remembered. I paused, the suddenness of the call throwing me. A favor? Tom, we're past favors, don't you think? It's Sarah. She's in deep this time. Dead's up to her eyeballs, and the wolves are at the door. We've sold everything. The house, the shop. It's still not enough. His words took a moment to sink in. And you're calling me why? I'm not part of the circus anymore, Tom. He sighed, a sound of desperation. Come on, don't be like that. You got out, made it big with your trading. Can't you spare something for old time's sake? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, he still saw me as a lifeline for their mess. Spare something for her after she nearly ruined us with her lies? You've got some nerve, Tom. It's not just for her. It's for all of us. You wouldn't be where you are without me. Don't forget that. He responded, a hint of resentment in his voice. I let out a short, piercing laugh. You are not the reason I am where I am. I am despite you. Do you believe I owe you anything? That is quite wealthy. The line was silent, a heavy, uneasy quiet. That's it then. Are you planning to abandon us? We, Tom, we do not exist. It has been a while since there was. Regarding turning my back, I believe you have misinterpreted me for someone who is still compassionate. As I hung up, I had a range of feelings, including relief and fury. That was really the end of that chapter in my life. I was struck by how far I had come as I sat in the living room of my new home, which I had acquired with hard work and intelligence. This was my haven, constructed not on the precarious foundation of lying and manipulation, but rather on my perseverance and diligence.
I'm Luna, and I'm 35 years old. My spouse, Mason, is 3 years my senior, and we were married 6 years ago. My dear father died of a disease and left me with a sizable inheritance, which drastically altered my life. I bought a new house with my bequest, which I treasure very much. This house has a comfortable aroma of freshly cut wood, and I can't help but think how happy my father would be to see it. My father used to live alone in our previous home, which was only 10 minutes' walk from our apartment. My father died from a fall not long after I moved out a few years ago, following the death of my mother. I had to make the tough choice to tear down our old family home and replace it with a new one after receiving the inheritance. The happy memories we created there, even though the old house's structure is gone, I think will always be in our hearts. Mason frequently cited my father when discussing the importance of starting over with a new house. I initially believed he was attempting to console me, but that quickly proved to be untrue. Mason suddenly requested me to fill out and mail divorce papers one evening. Perplexed, I inquired about his meaning. He told me quite frankly that we were divorcing and that the new house he was having constructed with my father's money was for his mistress, who he was going to live with. I was taken aback upon discovering his adultery, in sharp contrast to how he described our relationship. He acknowledged having an affair for approximately 9 months, during which time he described his mistress as charming, caring, and truly in love with him. Mason said he would take the house as alimony, saying he had no further benefits from our 6-year marriage that had produced children, and that he always hated returning home to me. I went to Mason for solace, since I was upset, but he gave me the finger instead. He said that my behavior influenced him to have an affair and ultimately decide to leave, and he held me accountable for his actions. He called it my alimony and gave me an envelope containing $12,000, telling me to be thankful since he was about to move into the new house. Feeling both overwhelmed and composed at the same time, I gave the envelope back to him and declined the money. Constructed with memories and inheritance in mind, the mansion was intended to be a haven, but it was now the focus of a devastating discovery. I said unequivocally, "If you no longer love me, there's no reason for us to stay married." and I consented to the divorce. I don't require cash. Mason expressed amazement at how easily I came to terms with our marriage's dissolution. He acknowledged and said, "Well, if you say so, just don't ask for it back later." He packed up his things and departed a few days later, taking the keys to our freshly constructed home with him. But soon after he moved out, Mason contacted me hysterically, his voice strained with fear. "What actions did you take?" When the police arrived at the house, they discussed trespassing charges and warrants. "What is happening?" He claimed that while he was with his lover, the cops had broken in and demanded to know if they knew it was lawful to do what they were doing. "You entered this residence using a stolen key, which is theft and trespassing, which is why we are here. Are you aware of that?" The cops said. Shaken and disoriented, Mason turned to face his lover, who looked at him with equal confusion. "This is your home, right?" she muttered. "You mentioned that you wanted to show me." He angrily yelled, "Be quiet and stay out of this," to which one cop cut him off. "Sorry to disrupt, but we need to handle this at the station." Mason called me desperate, caught between his woman and the police. "Why is this occurring right now? How did you act?" Calmly, "I haven't done much," was my response. "I just reported that there were strangers in my house and that my house keys were stolen. It makes sense to contact the police." I had already reported the incident, reverted to my maiden name Luna, and filed the divorce papers. "This is my home, Mason," I firmly stated as I went on. "Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" "I never consented to that," he disagreed. "You may easily manipulate events to support your story." "Are you kidding? How on earth do you think you own that house?" "The person on the house contract is me. I own the land and I paid for it with my father's inheritance," I declared categorically. Mason said, "But your father said it was for us. You were my husband at the time. Now that we are divorced, we hardly know one another. Why do you believe that this is your land?" I snapped back. "When he became sick, my father made the sensible decision to give me the land rights in order to avoid any issues in the event that something occurred to him. Maybe he anticipated something similar, which is why he suggested tearing down the old house and erecting a new one. I could see more clearly than ever before that property and money might readily turn into sources of conflict." Mason's ordinarily composed manner began to make sense to me after I agreed to the divorce. I thought, "So you planned this all along?" "I did nothing wrong," he shot back, sounding defensive. "From the beginning, you have misinterpreted every detail." Seeing him so naive and believing he would be content with his mistress was almost comical. "Stop being so silly," I shot back. "You hold me responsible for the divorce, the affair, and the house's loss. Now that you're caught between your fiancé and the authorities, how does that feel?" Mason, obviously unhappy with the turn of events, could only moan in response. "Hating me is the wrong path. Your whole mess is what you're doing. Do you know the saying, you reap what you sow? You deserve this." Mason lost control of his temper at that point and started yelling accusations into the phone. But all of a sudden, he was cut off. "Excuse me, are you the former wife of Mr. Gold? He's making a mess at your place. Please, might we have a word?" The call had been taken over by a policeman. After giving the officer a brief explanation of the circumstances, she expressed empathy for how challenging this must have been for me. Mason was later brought to the police station along with his mistress. Mason argued that it wasn't trespassing because the house was a gift from me. With genuine surprise, his mistress admitted that she was unaware that they were intruding. Mason attempted to bolster his allegations at the station with purported evidence, but in the end, the mistress's account was deemed reliable, and she was just given a warning before being released. However, Mason was fined after being found guilty of trespassing and larceny. Then it came up that, upon his release, Mason had named me as his guarantor, presumably so his controlling parents wouldn't know. The officer gave me this information, obviously frustrated. Why should I act as his surety? Now that we're divorced and essentially strangers, I firmly replied. I decline because I no longer have any relationship with Mr. Gold. His parents live close by. Kindly get in touch with them. The officer informed Mason, who was visibly frustrated. His parents, who were already aware of our divorce, due to his infidelity, were not yet informed of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had brought them fully up to speed on the situation. Reluctantly, after his parents requested more details, I visited Mason's parents' house. When I knocked on the door and started to explain, his mother immediately cut me off. No need to apologize, she said. It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this? I inquired. Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman, she revealed. We allowed them into the living room to discuss the situation. To my astonishment, Mason had brought his mistress along, creating a tense atmosphere. The living room scene unfolded with Mason, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Russell. Russell, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay. I greeted them. Luna, thanks for coming, Russell responded. I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Mason's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side? I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Mason and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. What were you thinking? Trying to take Luna's new house? Are you insane? Russell demanded of Mason. It's not that simple, Mason interjected. How is that even possible? Russell retorted, clearly frustrated. Your story is completely different from hers. Apparently, Mason had spun his version of events before I arrived. What were you told? I asked. Russell explained. He claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest. Really? He said that. I was incredulous. It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object, but that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership to him. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it is beyond comprehension. I'm so sorry, Luna, for having such a son. Mason's mother apologized. What are you saying, Mom? Mason argued. I'm telling the truth. Luna wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak. I nodded in agreement with Russell. Despite everything, Mason continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Mason asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling. I continued. Mason's college had looked uncomfortable during our conversation. No offense, but I thought it might happen. The colleague had said, What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked, the colleague shifting uncomfortably. The colleague finally spilled everything, revealing details that I should have known sooner. I wasn't initially aware of the full extent of Mason's actions, but a conversation with one of his colleagues soon brought everything to light. Mason had been openly bragging about his mistress, a woman 15 years his junior, lavishing her with expensive bags and jewelry. He boasted about his plans, even sharing that he intended to divorce me to marry his mistress, capitalizing on her recent inheritance from her deceased father to build a new house. He said, "Once the house is built, I'll divorce Luna and somehow claim it. No matter the opposition, I'll get it. Then my young new wife and I will live in the big house." The colleague recounted, it seemed the house built with my father's inheritance was not just a home, but a grand gesture intended for his proposal to her. Hearing this, I confronted Mason. "I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong?" I asked, my frustration evident. Mason, visibly flustered, attempted to justify his actions. "Well, yes. I bought her gifts. So what? I used my own money and gave Luna her living expenses. She's not my destined partner. This woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage." His parents, present during this confession, reacted with shock. However, the most astonishing response came from the mistress herself. "Mary, did I ever say that we were even dating?" she declared. "What do you mean?" Mason asked, bewildered. "Exactly that," she replied firmly. "I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now what are you talking about?" "That's creepy," she stated. Mason went pale, stunned by her revelation. At that point, I asked her, "So why did you come here with him today?" The mistress explained, "I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it was an affair, and I was prepared to pay the alimony. But I'm still a student." "A student? How old are you?" Russell, Mason's father, interjected, looking bewildered. "I lost my parents early and have been engaging in sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses," she confessed. This revelation turned the entire room silent, leaving everyone to digest the depth of deception and the surprising turn of events. As the discussion unfolded, the mistress clarified her financial situation, indicating she didn't have savings to immediately start paying the alimony. "I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary," she explained. "So you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony?" I asked. "Yes, that's right," she confirmed. Mason, who had been silently listening, suddenly erupted in anger. "Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you. But that's separate from the alimony you owe," I pointed out, trying to steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. "What about saying you wanted a house?" Mason challenged the mistress. "I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you," she replied, clarifying her intentions. Mason exclaimed in disbelief, "I was suddenly taken to that house, thinking it was yours. Then the police came, and I learned it was your wife's." The mistress bowed deeply to me, indicating her respect and acknowledging that all of this confusion was spurred by Mason's misunderstandings. "All right," I said, seeing an opportunity to resolve at least one issue. "If you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment. But promise me no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time." "I promise I'll never do it again," she said earnestly. Turning to Mason, I addressed the financial aspects of our separation, Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Mason asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $122,000, and now you're asking for more. That's not what we agreed on. Mason protested. I don't recall any agreement. I replied, You returned the $122,000 I gave you, saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $30,000, I clarified. And you're also at fault for not having children in the 6 years we were married. Mason suddenly accused, changing the subject. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, What are you doing, Mason? He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. Are you serious? Do you think her inability to have children is her fault? I asked, incredulous at his audacity. Enough with jokes, Dad. Mason's father interrupted, turning to him. Don't tell me you're blaming Luna for your affair, too. Mason stubbornly stated, Well, that's how it is. I shouldn't have tied the knot with her. It resembles fraud. How on earth did you think that? I put into the test. Your parents desired to have grandchildren. They decided it would be best to separate if she was unable to conceive. I chose her for that reason. Mason's father remarked, looking plainly upset. We must have raised you incorrectly if you really think that. Your mother waited 8 years to become pregnant. Before Mason was born, Deborah, Mason's mother, had to go through 8 arduous years of intensive reproductive treatments. Observing others have a simple time starting children while she battled caused her great stress and sadness. Tears were now streaming down her cheeks as she listened to the drama play out, a silent witness to the grief her son's actions had brought back. Russell, Mason's father, finally said, Leave this house now, clearly disappointed. Mason posed the obvious question, Why? Russell replied, You're a long-awaited son, and I can't bear to look at you now. His voice was laden with anguish. Remain away until you have a true understanding of your mistakes. But where ought I to go? Mason questioned, a hint of desperation in his tone. Go back to our apartment, I said. We've already canceled that flat. It was unnecessary to keep with the new house. I immediately canceled it after calling the police. There is nowhere for you to go back to. Mason realized he had nowhere to go and was clearly shaken. He attributed his mistress's actions to his frustration. You are to blame. You now claim you never meant to marry me, even though all the money has been spent. It is a scam, she answered calmly, saying, I was upfront about it being a sugar relationship. I never made gift or money requests. Feel free to file a lawsuit. But don't forget about the alimony. I have documentation of our agreement. I added, observing Mason become agitated. He stumbled and said, Wait, please wait. I ignored his request and called his parents to let them know what was going on before leaving their home. Later, after learning Mason no longer resided at his parents' home, I retained legal counsel and issued a demand letter for alimony. I ensured that it wasn't delivered there. The receptionist at his place of employment questioned, perplexed as she studied the letter. Why is it being sent here? Sending such documents to residential and employment addresses is feasible, I clarified. Is this what this is about? She asked, observing Mason's pallid, trembling appearance. Yes, I said. I simply stated the facts. I was not requested to be silent. It is his own fault. The demand letter that Mason's employer received immediately became public knowledge of his activities, including his engagement in sugar dating. His professional reputation took a hit as this revelation caused a larger conversation among his peers. Mason made the decision to go from his position, stating that he was departing on his terms, following a string of humiliating defeats and being unable to handle the rumors and murmurs. His troubles didn't end there. Feeling that he was a victim of marital fraud, he sought for free legal help. The legal advisor was not supportive, though. The advisor said, "We have seen cases similar to yours, but based on the evidence you have provided, this isn't considered fraud. At first, you consented to a sugar daddy relationship. If you later felt something, that was entirely your fault. If you want to sue, you can, but it will probably be a financial waste." Mason made the decision to drop the lawsuit after taking the advice. He'd eventually confided in me, feeling dejected and regretting his previous actions. "I'm not sure what I was contemplating. I had no idea how important you were, even after 6 years of dating." He begged sincerely, "I swear I'll make you happy this time and won't let myself be distracted by others." He begged me, but I was unmoved. I made a clear decision. "I decline," I retorted firmly. "Why?" Following so much pleading. He did not give up. I had realized during those 6 years that Mason was not a good person. He tried to take what was rightfully mine, put all the blame on me, and then came back brazenly when he had lost everything, expecting to make amends. "Why would I want to be back with someone who is so self-centered?" I inquired. "You don't have to put it that way," said Mason. "The same things you said to me once." Still, I was determined. Knowing his current situation, I firmly said, "Never contact me again." After that, I hung up, erased all of his contact details, and modified my phone number. A few days later, something unanticipated happened. I was told by one of the neighbors, "Your ex-husband came to the house the other day. He made a disturbance, so we had to chase him away." What did he have in mind? Shocked, I pondered out loud. To scare him off, the local ladies, who were aware of the circumstances, had even feigned to call the police. I haven't seen him since, so I don't know where he is or what his circumstances are right now. However, I have no doubt that he is not living a happy life.
Hello, I'm Karen, an architect by profession. Today, I'm embracing a new role, that of a bride filled with anticipation. As I make my way down the aisle, every aspect of our wedding, from the vibrant blooms to the carefully curated playlist, reflects my detailed planning. I've always envisioned this day as a page lifted from a romance novel, a joyful celebration of our love. At the altar, I see Terry, my soon-to-be husband, an engineer whose pragmatic, down-to-earth approach complements my artistic spirit. Together, we felt like the ideal pair, each enhancing the other's strengths. As I draw closer, I notice a hint of concern in Terry's eyes, though I attribute it to typical pre-wedding nerves. Nearby, I overhear Terry's mother, Melissa, whispering with an intense, unsettling look. Despite her smiles and compliments, her eyes seem to tell a different story. The ceremony moves forward, but Terry's vows feel somewhat cold, and there's a noticeable hesitation before his "I do." During the ring exchange, Melissa makes a point of taking photos, her tone more cautious than celebratory. At the reception, Melissa delivers subtly critical compliments about my dress. She praises its beauty while gently critiquing its unconventional style, lightly noting that we're celebrating love in our unique way. I brush off Melissa's veiled criticisms about our wedding choices. But before things can escalate, Terry steps in, asking his mother for a private moment with me. His intervention feels more like a resignation than genuine support, adding a strange note to what should be a day of happiness. Looking around the room for reassurance, I hope to find comfort amid the wedding chaos. Yet I can't shake the feeling that something fundamental isn't right. The tension is palpable, and the warning signs are too prominent to ignore any longer. As Terry and I step onto the dance floor for our first dance, the physical space between us mirrors the emotional gulf. Although we move in sync, emotionally we are worlds apart. The song meant to symbolize our union now seems ironically cruel. As the last notes of the music die away, Terry's attempt at comfort only highlighted the deepening gap between us. "So, Mrs. Karen, ready for forever?" he asked, the irony of his question thick in the air. I wanted to share my uncertainties, to question if our future together would always be shadowed by today's discomfort. Instead, I hid my doubts behind a tentative smile, clinging to the hope that the dark clouds hanging over us would eventually clear, and that this rocky beginning wasn't a preview of our future. Little did I know, this day was just the prelude to a challenging period that would test not only the resilience of our marriage, but also the core of my identity. As we raised our glasses in a toast to our union, the celebratory words rang hollow, eclipsed by an unsettling sense of loss. The journey back to my home, a charming 3-bedroom house that symbolized my hard-won independence, marked the start of our shared life. This space was meant to be our sanctuary, the solid foundation for our future together. However, it quickly turned into the battleground for a series of conflicts that felt more like intrusions than the beginnings of marital harmony. Melissa, residing just a short distance away, began to drop by with alarming regularity, often uninvited. Her criticisms were relentless, targeting everything from my cooking to the decor of our home. Whether she was complaining about the taste of my dishes or the choice of bathroom tiles, her critiques were varied yet consistently harsh. Terry's efforts to mediate were weak at best, seeming more performative than genuinely protective. Melissa's intrusions became a regular ordeal. Each visit was another chance for her to assert dominance through thinly veiled insults and critiques. The turning point came one afternoon when Melissa arrived with suitcases in tow, her intentions clear and her sense of entitlement palpable. "This is no ordinary visit," she declared, breezing past me to place her luggage in my favorite cozy corner by the window, a haven for my quiet reflection and reading. "This spot will suit me just fine," Melissa announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. As I watched Melissa settle into our home, my heart sank. I caught Terry's eye, silently pleading for him to step in and protect the sanctity of the place we called ours. In a moment that called for unity, I pulled him aside, my voice shaking with emotion. "This is our home, Terry. Shouldn't we have talked about this together?" His look was distant, missing the warmth that had once comforted me. "Mom's getting older, Karen. It's not fair for her to be alone. She needs to be with family," he explained, emphasizing family in a way that made me feel more like an outsider than a partner. "So I'm not family, is that it?" The words stumbled out, heavy with hurt as tears began to form. Terry replied quickly, his patience thinning. "You know that's not what I mean, Karen, but I owe it to her." "What about what we owe to each other? Aren't we supposed to be building our life together, not adjusting it to include your mom as a permanent third?" I argued, feeling as though my words were just bouncing off him. My concerns, my feelings seemed to vanish into thin air, and just like that, the decision was made. Melissa's presence in our home was a done deal. With Melissa in the house, the atmosphere changed drastically. Every space that once held our shared dreams now carried the burden of tension and disagreement. My treasured reading nook was overrun with her belongings, the kitchen transformed into a constant battlefield of her critiques. Terry, The man I married now seemed to be more in sync with Melissa than with me. It dawned on me that this battle was not just for my marriage or my personal space, but for my identity, my dignity, and my peace. How did we get here? How had my desires, my space, and my voice become secondary to Melissa's preferences? The transformation was dark. My beloved nook became a symbol of Melissa's encroachment, the kitchen a venue for her endless criticism, and my husband a stranger aligned with what felt like an adversary. This was only the beginning. Life, already filled with challenges, spiraled into a relentless nightmare as the oppressive atmosphere in our home mirrored the diminishing of my own space and voice. Amidst this mounting tension, a discovery brought everything into sharp focus. The unmistakable sight of 2 lines on a pregnancy test, signaling the start of a new life. In the chaos, discovering I was pregnant should have been a joyous revelation. However, the dense, tense air around me turned almost suffocating as I held the pregnancy test, my hands trembling with a mix of excitement and dread. This milestone, which I had always imagined would be one of the happiest moments of my life, now felt like an overwhelming burden. Alone in the bathroom, tears welled up as I confronted my reflection, the reality hitting me hard. The stakes were now much higher. When I finally shared the news with Terry, his reaction was underwhelming. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly shifting the conversation to some renovation idea his mother had proposed. Melissa didn't just see my pregnancy as big news. She saw it as her new project. She took it upon herself to manage every aspect of it, from my diet to the birthing plan, all under the guise of being helpful. Her interference soon became oppressive. She critiqued every bite I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest meals, and questioning my weight management. Despite my assurances that everything was doctor-approved, she scoffed. Doctors these days have no clue, dismissively convinced her old-school methods were superior to modern medical advice. As my pregnancy advanced, Melissa's control over my life grew even more intrusive. She expected me to maintain our home to her strict standards, regardless of my physical state. "Karen, why isn't the living room clean yet?" She would demand, comfortably ensconced in my reading nook, which she had taken over as her base for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My pleas for rest were ignored, with Melissa dismissing pregnancy as no excuse for laziness. Terry's silence during these interactions only deepened the tension. His lack of support became painfully clear, especially during a dinner that escalated into a heated argument over baby names. Melissa sharply criticized my chosen name, and that was the final straw. "Enough, Melissa. This is my child, and I will decide how to name them," I asserted, my patience finally snapping. Her response was one of sheer indignation, as if my desire to control my own life was a direct affront to her. Terry's feeble attempts at mediation, often siding with his mother and dismissing me as overly emotional, only widened the rift between us. This growing divide underscored a stark reality. I was not only battling for my voice and space in my own home, but now, more critically, for the right to shape my future and that of my child. In all the chaos, the revelation that I was pregnant deepened the already suffocating atmosphere of our home. Holding the pregnancy test, my hands trembled with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had always imagined that discovering I was pregnant would be one of the most joyful moments in my life, filled with excitement and celebration. However, as I stood alone in the bathroom, facing my reflection with tears welling up, this milestone felt like a daunting burden instead. When I shared the news with Terry, his reaction was disappointingly subdued. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly changing the subject to a renovation idea his mother had proposed. It was clear that Melissa viewed my pregnancy not just as news, but as her new project. She took it upon herself to oversee everything from my diet to the birthing plan, all under the pretense of being helpful. Melissa's interference soon evolved into outright control. She monitored every bite I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest meals and questioning my weight management, despite my assurances that my diet was doctor-approved. She scoffed, "Doctors these days have no clue," utterly convinced her dated knowledge was superior to contemporary medical advice. As my pregnancy progressed, Melissa's demands grew increasingly unreasonable. She expected me to maintain the house to her exacting standards, no matter my condition. "Karen, why isn't the living room clean yet?" she would demand, ensconced in my once peaceful reading nook, which she had commandeered for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My pleas for rest were ignored. Melissa dismissed pregnancy as no excuse for laziness. Terry's silence during these interactions only intensified the tension. His lack of support became glaringly obvious, especially during a dinner that spiraled into an argument over baby names. Melissa's harsh critique of my chosen name was the last straw. "Enough, Melissa. This is my child, and I will decide how to name them," I declared, my patience completely eroded. Her reaction was one of sheer indignation, as if my desire to make decisions about my own life was a direct insult to her. Terry's feeble attempts at mediation, often siding with his mother and dismissing me as overly emotional, only deepened the rift between us. I felt more isolated than ever, trapped in a home that had transformed into a battleground. Where my voice seemed increasingly insignificant, it was no longer just about selecting a baby name. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and the sense of belonging that had been steadily undermined by Melissa's domineering presence. As I stared at the reflection of my once gleaming wedding ring, I scarcely recognized the woman looking back at me. A woman who was gradually losing everything she cherished. Her sanctuary, her self-respect, and most painfully, her resolve to stand up for herself. During one of our tense confrontations, Melissa, brimming with a vindictive sense of triumph, delivered a blow that changed everything. Melissa had insinuated that perhaps I didn't belong in their family if I couldn't handle a simple disagreement. The most excruciating part, though, was Terry's silence. His lack of response was deafening, reinforcing the notion that this struggle had been my harsh reality for much too long. Days melded into one another as I moved through a house that felt less and less like home, clinging to the sole beacon of hope I had left, the life growing inside me. Yet even this small comfort seemed under siege in the increasingly toxic environment. The tipping point came on a cold evening during yet another fraught family dinner. Despite my efforts to craft a flawless meal, Melissa's criticisms were relentless, attacking everything from the seasoning to the execution. Each of her harsh words felt like a physical blow, slowly chipping away at my already brittle confidence. But it was her next taunt, questioning my capability as a mother based on my so-called failure to manage household chores, that cut the deepest. Terry's quiet acceptance of her words was the final push I needed. Fueled by a potent mix of pent-up resentment and sheer desperation, I found my voice. "I've been carrying our child, managing our home, and enduring endless criticism from your mother, and you're telling me to step it up." The shock on their faces was evident, but I was past caring. For too long, I had allowed myself to be diminished and demeaned. But in that moment, I reclaimed my voice. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." The clarity of my decision sliced through years of suppressed feelings like a beacon of light. It was a declaration of my refusal to endure any more disrespect or emotional torment. My voice quivered with emotion as I spoke, yet I remained resolute. I refuse to raise my child in an environment where their mother is constantly undermined. If this is your idea of family, count me out. I declared, my words ringing with finality. As I rose from the dinner table, leaving their stunned silence behind, gathering only the essentials, I made my way to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Melissa, this house is mine. I bought it. I decide who stays and who goes. Terry's voice broke through, laced with desperation. Karen, please, let's talk about this. But I was beyond negotiation. There's nothing left to discuss, I replied, my tears bearing witness to the agony of my decision. Stepping out into the cold night felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with uncertainty, but also tinged with a profound sense of liberation. The closing door behind me marked the end of a tumultuous saga, a final farewell to a life I could no longer endure. With each step, a mix of pain and determination coursed through me, fueled by the urgent need to reclaim my autonomy. The journey to my parents' home blurred with cold exhaustion and heartache. Just moments from the sanctuary of my childhood haven, a stumble sent me crashing to the ground. The physical pain was a mere echo of my inner turmoil, yet far from deterring me, this fall only strengthened my resolve. Arriving at my parents' doorstep, the concern on their faces mirrored the gravity of my situation. As they rushed me to the hospital, I realized that this moment of vulnerability marked not just an end, but also a new beginning. Lying in the hospital bed, coming to terms with my reality, I knew that returning to my former life was no longer an option. This breaking point was a crucial step towards reclaiming the life and dignity that had been stripped away from me. A painful yet necessary transition towards healing and independence. The clarity that comes with such pivotal moments was profound, illuminating the path forward from the shadows of my troubled past to a future I would shape myself. Amidst a whirlwind of emotions, I stood surrounded by the comforting yet anxious presence of my parents. Their silent worry spoke volumes about their fears concerning the true state of my marriage, now starkly revealed in its troubled depths. Breaking the heavy silence, my mother voiced her concern, her words laden with the weight of the unfolding reality. Karen, dear, what's your plan now? Unsure yet resolute, I replied, I'm not sure, Mom, but one thing's for sure. I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever. My declaration, more assured than I expected, resonated with newfound determination. My father, who had been pacing anxiously, paused to offer reassurance, emphasizing their unwavering support regardless of my decision. He urged me to consider not just my future, but also the child growing inside me. His words prompted a silent acknowledgement from me. My mind had been a battleground of uncertain scenarios, each fraught with the possibility of a fresh start. The unexpected buzz of my phone shattered my reverie. A message from Terry, a plea for communication. Yet to me, his timing felt like a door long closed, his words unseen. Left hanging in the void as I powered off my phone, a symbolic end to our dialogue. My next steps became clear, marked by action rather than words. Consulting a family lawyer was my first decisive act toward untangling the turmoil of my marriage. With the unwavering support of my parents, we navigated the cold, legal breakdown of our union, discussing divorce, custody arrangements, and financial support. Despite the sterile nature of these discussions, they empowered me, marking the initial steps towards seizing control of my destiny and securing the well-being of my unborn child. Within a week, Terry and Melissa received the formal notices. Divorce papers for Terry and an eviction notice for Melissa from the home that was legally mine. Alongside these were demands for substantial child support and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. Though drastic, these actions were imperative, severing the ties that had long bound me to a life of despair. When I eventually re-engaged with my phone, it was inundated with Terry's attempts to reconnect. His messages carried a blend of regret and a plea for reconciliation. Yet the wounds inflicted by nights of humiliation, years of neglect, and Melissa's calculated malice, all silently condoned by Terry, ran too deep. The fleeting temptation to entertain his overtures was swiftly overshadowed by the memory of enduring pain. This moment wasn't merely about closing a chapter. It was about reclaiming my narrative, where the shadows of the past no longer dictated the brightness of my future. The love I once harbored for Terry had been utterly overshadowed by the grief of our disintegrating marriage. Taking decisive steps, I cleared away all remnants of him from my life. I deleted his messages, erased his contact details, and blocked him on all social media. To me, Terry had become a chapter of my past, a distressing period I was more than ready to close. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Navigating a divorce with a child on the way was no simple journey. But I was determined to forge my path, stepping away from the stifling shadows that had once engulfed me toward a future brimming with hope. On the day of the court proceedings, the room was permeated with a sterile chill, characteristic of spaces where fates are decided. Seated beside me, my lawyer radiated confidence, while my parents provided silent yet steadfast support from behind. Across the aisle, Terry appeared lost, slowly coming to terms with the reality before him, while Melissa's expression fluctuated between shock and defiance. As the session commenced and the judge entered, prompting everyone to rise, a whirlwind of legal motions and arguments unfolded. It seemed as though Melissa and Terry were truly seeing the repercussions of their actions for the first time, not just through the legal ramifications, but through my eyes as well. When Melissa was called to testify, her usual bravado faded. She tried to justify her intrusions as concern for her son's well-being, but her arguments fell flat under the judge's skeptical scrutiny. The judge delivered a clear and firm verdict. I was granted a full divorce and sole custody of our unborn child. Terry was mandated to provide child support, and Melissa was hit with a substantial fine for emotional abuse and harassment, leaving her visibly shaken. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt a wave of liberation mixed with a tinge of melancholy. My marriage had not ended with loud confrontations, but rather with the quiet shuffling of papers and the firm, unwavering voice of justice. This chapter of my life was now firmly closed, paving the way for a fresh start free from the burdens of the past. The cost of my newfound freedom was something I could never have anticipated on the day I exchanged vows. Exiting the courtroom, Terry approached with a look of bewilderment, voicing his remorse and disbelief at how our lives had unraveled. Yet as I looked into his eyes, I no longer saw my future, but a profound void where love had once lived. I never envisioned this as our ending, Terry, but apologies can't undo what's been done, I stated firmly, turning away to leave the past behind. Melissa saw my gaze, perhaps in search of forgiveness or acknowledgement. However, I could not afford that closure. She had taken too much from me. Refusing to grant Melissa the satisfaction of seeing any further impact on my spirit, I stepped into the embrace of the outside world, which seemed to welcome me with open arms. The sun shone brighter, the colors appeared more vibrant. It felt as if I was seeing through a new lens, one not clouded by the shadows of past turmoil. My mother's embrace and her words of pride brought tears to my eyes. "You're truly free now, Karen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have faced this without you and Dad." I responded, my heart swelling with gratitude for their steadfast support. That evening, in the tranquility of what was now solely my home, I discovered a profound peace. Alone yet far from lonely, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was free to live on my terms. The path ahead as a single mother seemed daunting, yet as I felt my unborn child's gentle movements, a wave of confidence washed over me. We would navigate this journey together. I was certain of it. The trials I had endured had brought me to this juncture of self-discovery. Although they left scars, these scars told a story of resilience, not surrender. Gazing toward the horizon, I felt propelled not merely by circumstances, but by choice. This realization imbued me with a profound sense of empowerment, poised to embrace the future. I was motivated not out of obligation, but from a place of deliberate determination. I recognized this moment as the dawn of a significant new chapter in my life, ready to take on whatever lay ahead with a renewed spirit and unwavering resolve.